All right. Hope everybody is doing well. And we should be good to go. Some crazy weather today. We've had a lot of kind of thunder showers and that sort of thing. Tomorrow I'd like to do a little bit of a Q&A if I could. So if you have questions you'd like me to answer or topics you'd like me to discuss, you can send it to my email there at the bottom of the screen. I'm just going to close that down. All right. So for today, one of the themes that has kind of come up in the last few days for myself is just kind of being authentic and how to establish authenticity in the things that you're doing day to day and in your day-to-day lives. So that's what we're going to cover today. And again, if you've got questions or topics that you'd like me to look at, you can send your questions to my email down there at the screen. I'm going to have that scrolling across today. All right, so one of the things that is kind of interesting about authenticity is as we fit into different social structures, it tends to change and develop. Or you can find it more difficult to be authentic to who you are throughout those various situations. And I'm going to go over some material from a psychologist named Martin Seligman. And, bumped my table there. Sorry about that. So he basically says that in order to live a good life, in deriving happiness by using your signature strengths every day in the main realms of your living. A meaningful life adds one more component, using those same strengths to forward knowledge, power, and goodness. A life that does this is pregnant with meaning, and if God comes at the end, such life is sacred. So what we're really talking about is how to live a good life and develop a sense of authenticity throughout that life. And it's one of those things that has come up recently in a few of my other live chats. So I thought I would go over some ideas about how to become authentic in your sort of day-to-day life. All right, so there's been a few trends in psychology over the course of, the 20th century, I would say. Most of the research was primarily focused on mental illness to the point where we would get about 100 articles published on mental illness compared to about one on mental health. And the benefit of that was that we got a really great understanding of things like mental illnesses like depression and schizophrenia and these sort of, some people might classify them as the negative elements of human behavior. But unfortunately, we've made a lot less progress with mental health. And that's become one of the primary major issues in today's society. We see mental health all over the place. There's tons of societies and people trying to help out with those issues. Now, in order to establish some of that, they put these people on a spectrum. So we got really good at using things like psychotherapy, pharmacology, drugs, and that kind of thing to bring people from like a -9 to a -3, eventually to a 0. So you got back to a sort of fresh starting point eventually. However, we didn't gain a lot of knowledge in how to bring people from, say, a 0 to a 3 and then to a 9. And my camera has gotten really blurry all of a sudden, and I don't know why. All right. In order to do that, I'm going to try to fix my camera here. That's better. Now you can actually see me. So if you got a comment, feel free to comment at the bottom. Hopefully I will see it. Now, I was going to talk about establishing some core virtues or core values as we kind of go through this idea of creating authenticity. So we want to create some core values on, that develop around self-awareness, goal-directed behavior, altruism, gratitude, these sort of things. These are the things that I'm really interested in. And if you look across several different cultures, across several different time frames, you'll find that most societies will have some version of about 6 core virtues. So if you think of them as like wisdom and knowledge, so knowledge being the information you've gained about a particular subject or mastered about a particular subject, and then wisdom would be the practice of that knowledge over time. Courage would be the development or being able to use the newfound knowledge that you do have. There's love and humility, justice and injustice. We saw an example of that over the last few days with the police officer and the person who they were trying to arrest. If you've been on social media, you probably saw a lot of that. There's temperance, and then there's some sort of idea of transcendence where in order to move on from some one thing, something sort of has to die so that you can move forward and sort of transcend out of sort of the old you, if you will. So if we start with these kind of 6 core values, we later on developed about 24 different characteristics of strength. And that's ultimately what I'm going to focus on here for the most part, is that we each have aspects of strengths in our personality. And what we've found is that a lot of the mounting research and science has shown that if we practice our core strengths, we tend to lead happier day-to-day lives, and we create a stronger sense of well-being for ourselves. And ultimately, the focus here is to focus on your strengths, rather than your weaknesses. So if you start to look at your strengths, you want to kind of double down on those things. And it's actually been shown that people who focus on their strengths tend to be more successful than people with, say, really high IQs or GPAs, that kind of thing. And then with the weaknesses, you just want to make sure that your weaknesses are strong enough so that they're not slowing you down. So for example, if one of your weaknesses is that you don't understand how to fix a car, you want to be able to take your car somewhere so that you can get it fixed so that it's not literally slowing you down. Like if you have a flat tire and you don't have the understanding of how to change your tire, you need to make sure that you can find someone who does so that that weakness of yours doesn't slow you down. And that's kind of one of the nice things about focusing on your strengths, is that when you focus on your strengths, you get good at all these sort of areas that you're already good at. You're going to get really good at them. And in a society where we're dependent on other people will focus on their strengths. And when you bring them all together, you end up with this idea of kind of relying on each other's strengths so that somebody else will be able to be strong in an area where you're weak. And then sort of the whole greater good moves forward. So something that comes up, of course, and this is something that I work on a lot with my clients and a lot with my employees and whatnot, is that we need to sort of establish what our strengths actually are. So something that you can actually just literally ask yourself is like, what are your greatest strengths? What are you really good at? And it's important to understand that depending where you're at, your strengths may vary. So you may have very different strengths at home versus at work versus in social situations, or maybe your sports and that kind of thing. So you want to have some idea of what your strengths actually are and how you can best utilize them. So a good thing to do is sort of write down maybe what your top 5 strengths are. Now, you may not be able to come up with 5. Try to come up, 3 and 4 is good. Try to do more than 2, though. And ultimately, we're going to use that to sort of map out a good life for yourself. So in order to establish a good life, we want to create a difference between what a good life is versus what, say, a pleasant life is. So a pleasant life might be, drinking champagne and driving Porsches or fancy cars, or sitting on the beach and drinking, champagne and that kind of stuff. Those are sort of really pleasant ideas and pleasant lives, but typically for most individuals, you can't do that for very long. Or if you could, it won't be long enough. Now, when we go on vacation, say you take 7 days off, and yeah, maybe you're going to lounge on the beach for 7 days, but at the end of those 7 days, you feel a need to kind of get back to work, right? And that's kind of what we're talking about, is getting back to using your strengths day to day. So out of your greatest strengths, you may want to think about what your signature strengths are. And to do that, you might want to think about what your friends say or your colleagues say are your signature strengths. So what are you best at? So they could be things like being creative, being optimistic or having hope, courageous, kindness, generosity. Maybe you've got a lot of energy and enthusiasm or wisdom. Those could all be really good examples of what some of your core strengths are. And so once you've established what your core strengths are, you want to be able to find a way to use them as often as you can. And by using those strengths, what we're doing is we're contributing to the greater good of the sort of groups that we're in. And we're going to call that essentially what your calling is. So essentially there are 3 types of, we'll call them work orientations, just to put an example to it. Now you can look at a job, a career, and a calling. So a job would be something that you're just doing for the paycheck. You're punching in and punching out. Your job may be just there to get the bills paid by the end of the month, right? A career is going to be a little bit more. It's going to be kind of a domain of mastery that you've developed. And then your calling is going to be something that you're extremely passionate about. So an example job might be that you're a waitress just waiting tables on your way through university. Your career could be hospitality. Maybe you become a restaurant owner, but your calling may be that you really want to help people. Right? Those 3 things all relate to one another. They don't necessarily have to relate to one another. You could be a waitress whose career wants to be, or you want your career to be in some other area, and then maybe your passion is completely different. But if you can line them up, you're going to have an easier path to that calling. So a job, it's important to also to understand that any job, so I use that example of a waitress and a restaurant owner and somebody wanting to help people, but a job can also become a calling. Right. And a calling can be a job. You could find physicians or like personal trainers who views their work as a job and is just simply interested in making a good income. And I wouldn't define that as someone who has a calling to do that job. While, say, somebody who is a garbage collector, they may find that as their calling, because essentially what they're trying to do is make the world a cleaner and healthier place to live. They're doing more good for their communities. So have a look again, maybe write down what your top 5 signature strengths might be. So for example, do you get to use them every day? So I gave you a bunch of examples earlier. Are you getting to be creative every day? Are you creative in your business dealings or in the career that you're looking for? Are you finding different ways to communicate with people? Are you optimistic every day? Do you have the courage to take maybe a financial risk to ultimately benefit the business? Are you generous and kind? Are you enthusiastic about the work week or the work day or what your business is going to be doing coming up? And then, do you have wisdom? Do you have wisdom in your area of expertise? And do you get to use that? Do you get to mentor younger employees and that sort of thing? So take your 5 strengths and try to figure out if you do get to do those every day, if you get to put those into practice. And ultimately, having a good life is going to be about being able to take your strengths and repeat them daily. So this is going to be a day-to-day change that you're going to see. And so again, when you look at your strengths, write down how you can use them every day. Write down what you do currently in your day-to-day using your strengths, and then write them down in ways that they could be used. So maybe it's something that you're not currently doing, but something that you could be doing. And then ultimately, you want to be providing those strengths in a way that is not just self-motivated, but ultimately into something that is a bigger picture, something much larger than yourself, something that you're really taking aim at. Now, I use this process quite a bit with, especially with my athletes who I'm training. It comes up a lot with say the fighting sports, for example, like in jiu-jitsu. It's, what are the areas that you're really strong with in jiu-jitsu, and then what are the areas that are maybe holding you back? So those areas that you're holding back, we need to develop in a fashion where you're good enough that they're not going to cause you to lose the fight. And then we want to find areas where you're comfortable taking the fight and being able to develop a plan to get you there. So when I'm working with my athletes, I don't develop much of a strategy outside of that. I look at what they're really good at, and I'll have my list of things that they're really good at and my list of areas that they'll be able to excel at, or areas in, say, the match that that will give them the highest percentage of victory. And I will compare that with what their list is. So I want to make sure that my athletes are comfortable in the areas that they're going into. And sometimes there's a difference there. Maybe I'm seeing something that they're not feeling, or I'm seeing something that they're not seeing either. And it's really important to be able to keep your athletes comfortable, especially in something like a jiu-jitsu match where the stakes are fairly high. And so I'll have them write that stuff out, and we'll kind of compare, kind of come up with a bit of a game plan. And our game plan isn't necessarily against the opponent. It's about what would a perfect match look like for them, and where are they comfortable taking that match. So you can really take a lot of these principles that I've talked about today and apply them to other areas of your life. So we talked about jobs and careers, but what about your health and your fitness? So your health, well, and your fitness, like you're working out, like what is your favorite body parts to work out with? Well, like most guys like to work out their upper body. So maybe that's a strength of yours. I love training my arms, for example. So maybe I'm going to line my arms up on a day where I'm feeling the least motivated to actually work out. Maybe that's towards the end of the week. People hate training their legs. Everyone's always, except for women these days, but a lot of people like to skip leg day, especially guys. We skip leg days all the time. Well, when are you the most motivated to work out? There's going to be a lot of factors that go into that, but when are you going into that gym thinking, I'm going to kill this workout, it's going to be fantastic? Line your least favorite body part to exercise, line them up on those days when you're the most motivated. And of course, the other thing that you can do is actually just get away from doing split programs and do more full body workouts. That way you get to do your favorite exercises every day or every time you're at the gym, and then you can kind of sprinkle in some of the stuff that you don't enjoy doing. So that is going to cover it for today, basically trying to find authenticity in all the things that you do. We went over basically 5 points. What are your 5 strengths, and how are you able to use those 5 strengths day to day? All right. Hope you guys all have a great day, and I will see you next time. All right. Thanks for watching.